This is Bree Garrell, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a Mellon Grant-sponsored series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, graduate students, and everyone in between, culture workers and political organizers, in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Today's conversation is with Dr. Alisha Gaines, who is an associate professor of African American and African Studies at the Carter G. Woodson Institute at the University of Virginia. She is the co-humanities director of the Evergreen Plantation Archaeological Field School in Edgard, Louisiana, and is currently writing her second manuscript, Children of the Plantationocene, which centers on Black American origin stories, Black craftscapes, and what we collectively inherit from the plantation. In today's conversation, we discuss Black study as an integral component of an insurgent Black radical tradition, the Black South and the plantation as rich spaces of knowledge production, and the role of Black studies in the fight against local, national, and global dimensions of anti-blackness and fascism today. Hi, Dr. Gaines. How are you doing today?
I'm very well. Thank you so much, Bree.
We're very excited to have you here on the Black Studies Podcast today, so let's jump right into it. I want to give you the space to talk a little bit about your work, both like the past and present work that you're doing. More specifically, what questions in the study of Black life intrigue you and guide your thinking, writing, and pedagogical practices. We'll talk about how it relates to the field of Black studies a little bit later, but for now, I want us to discuss the evolution of your thinking over the years, or perhaps even some key moments in your intellectual journey that led you to Black studies.
Sure. So I think I'm going to start at the end of your question with those key moments that led me to Black studies. I came to Black studies through my grandmother. She handed me Beloved and Song of Solomon when I was in high school. I think she did this because Oprah Winfrey told her to in the book club, right? Even so, but either way, I get Toni Morrison in high school, and I understand the world and my place in it through, right, the difficult miracle of African American literature. And of course, I'm borrowing that phrase from June Jordan's description of Black poetry. But my grandmother put those books in my hands, and when she did that, she countered the ways in which Black folk were denigrated in my high school. And for context, I grew up in Ohio, and I went to primarily private evangelical Christian schools, where there was a lot of harm done in that educational space. Like, I was literally taught the curse of Ham, like for real. Yeah, like for real, in ninth grade. And so I think, she was an elementary public school teacher in Cleveland, Ohio. And as an educator, she understood profoundly that the education of a little Black girl has to happen both inside and outside of the classroom. And before I left Ohio for Spelman College, where I did my undergraduate degree, I was following in her footsteps. She went to Spelman. Her mother went to Spelman. And so the gift of Spelman College, and I'll call it a gift because it profoundly shaped me in so many ways. It felt like a birthright. It felt like where I was supposed to be. And the reorientation that I got at Spelman felt nearly inevitable because of that. And at Spelman, our first required course was African Diaspora and the World. And so immediately, right, I'm in this Black space, in this Black Southern city, and reading. And I still have my ADW reader, by the way. And I was looking at it to see what they assigned, right? And it's Assata Shakur and Fidel Castro and Langston Hughes Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, Hazel Carby. It was this just wealth of the Black intellectual tradition, and not just in the United States, that really shaped how I understand this discipline. And at Spelman also, I was able to finally see who I could become and who I'm still trying to become, because Black women educators outside of my home were finally legible to me. So there's no Dr. Gaines without Dr. Donna Akiba Sullivan Harper, who's my mentor. There's no Dr. Gaines without Cynthia Neal Spence, who I still call Dean Spence, even though she is not a dean anymore, and she insists, like, don't tell me Dean. No, Dean Spence for life. And so at Spelman, Black worlds were cracked open for me in so many ways. And moving to Atlanta at 18 began my earnest and kind of lifelong study of the Black South, which thematically shapes my research, both past and present. I'm always thinking about my relationship to this region that I am of, right? As a descendant of enslaved folks in the South, as a great-granddaughter of the Great Migration. I'm of the South, but not from the South. Mm-hmm. And I've lived in various Souths now my entire adult life. So Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, and now Virginia.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Gaines. I'm fascinated by how that moment of your grandmother and the fact that she too was Black woman educator, but found it imperative, almost like this, like without you even understanding the how it would shift your world that way, giving you Beloved or Song of Solomon. But it's almost like the keys have led you, and like you're articulating, they have led you to Black studies, but also, like you said, they've cracked open the world that you are of, and continue to build and create within. And that legacy and just being in that tradition, and I don't know, it's fascinating to me. Especially when you describe like Spelman as this gift and as this like reorientation. Especially as you described your other experiences in these, primarily it sounds like hostile, like anti-Black kind of educational spaces. It's beautiful to listen to you narrate that journey.
Thanks. I mean, I think you're right, Brie. I would call them anti-Black. Right? I didn't have the language of segregation academy that I'd have now, but that's what they were. And I asked in 10th grade, I asked my teacher, why she didn't teach any Black literature. And she told me that Black literature is too sexually inappropriate.
Wow.
Right?
Oh.
The whole thing, girl? I mean, like, what?
Everything?
Everything? And so as a parting gift when I graduated, I gave her an anthology of Black literature. And I said, I'm sure, I am petty. I am so petty. I said, in the little note, I'm sure I can find something, right, to teach from this long, right, history, this canon that's been with us since before the founding of this country. I'm sure you can find something.
Yes. Oh my gosh, Dr. Gaines. For one, I love that you did that. And two, I hope she learned something from it. And if not,
I don't know.
None of our business. But
no, it's not. So it's above us now.
Yes, but I love even that approach of just like, opening up those who may sometimes either by default or by choice be ignorant to Black life worlds, Black literature, Blackness as it exists outside of particular logics and stuff. Oh, Dr. Gaines, you're too cool. But I want to ask you now, I guess, especially in reflecting on how you've got to Black studies, like how do you envision the field of Black studies, considering it has its origins in student, professor, and community activism, but has also like simultaneously established, expanded, and explored this idea of a Black intellectual tradition? How do you see the meaning and purpose of the field and how it should negotiate the relationship between political impact and the development of an intellectual expressive tradition?
Thank you. That's such a good question. I actually take a longer view of the field than the last 50 or so odd years. And that's because of the critical inheritance of Black study. That's so important to me. And I locate the beginning of that on the plantation. And I'll tell you when I had this moment of realization around that. So I'm sitting with a group of students on the front porch of a cabin in the quarters of a Louisiana plantation in the summer, and we're working through the Code Noir, right, all together.
Oh.
And I had this incredible intuitive knowing that this is not the first time a group of people have done this in this space, right? So maybe it didn't look like everyone had a course reader and we're all like flipping through pages. It didn't look like that, of course, but you know, for survival purposes, right? In order to understand how one makes this place livable. They had to understand the meaning of that text. And so it was then that I was like, whoa, Black study, right, is much, much older of a tradition, of a radical tradition, of an insurgent tradition than just talking about it from the 1960s. And then thinking about plantations again, it's a plantation where I first found out about this podcast. It was
wow.
Yes, it was Woodland Plantation in Laplace, Louisiana, and that is the site of the beginning of the largest slave revolt in U.S. history, the 1811 German Coast Uprising. And Woodland is now owned by Joe and Joy Banner of the Descendants Project out of Wallace, Louisiana. And so Black women own this site, right, of resistance. And they were doing a commemoration of the uprising last January, and folks were tabling, and I'm going around the tables and collecting my literature and signing up for mailing lists. And the Charles Delon chapter of Asala had a table, and the dude manning the table was like, you know, we were chatting, and he was like, "Do you know about the Black Studies podcast?" And I was like, "What?" Right? And so not only do I have that moment, right, with these students and understanding deeply, right, but then I also have this moment where not the past of Black Studies, but the present of Black Studies, I'm finding on plantations. And so I was like, something is going on here with this site. And that is now, you know, thinking through Black America's relationship to the plantation is my current, or maybe my life's work. But I don't think those things are coincidences. I think they are Black ways of knowing that are intuitive and magical and, yeah, amazing.
No, thank you so much for that. And that does feel very divinely orchestrated, the way
Right?
that, yes, to come into that knowing, but then to, again, it be like reaffirmed or
Yes.
like opened up again for you in this way. I think that's, yes. That
Like, as if the
for a
universe
reason.
is like, do not miss this message.
Yes.
We're going to give it to you again.
Yes. And I appreciate you like opening the space to talk about like there is the history of the field, but getting into the actual practice of Black study being something that is longstanding and not attached to any particular, you know, space or like time, but it's really just a mode of, you know, I don't want to say survival, but I love the language where you said to make this world kind of livable. And the plantation being the space in which you were able to identify that. And especially as you mentioned, like just being in the South and in the work that I've read that you shared, like being a student of the South is just very interesting, I guess, the geographies that have played a role in how you recognize like Black studies as it is continuously developing and stuff. Yes. So, and to speak again to your work is invested in many facets of Black life and history, particularly, as you've mentioned, like, you know, the materialities and socialities of Black life in the afterlives of slavery, but as well as it being deeply, like, I don't want to say entrenched, but committed to the study of Black literature and Black life worlds, and Black lived experiences more openly. How do you see your work, and you've kind of touched on this a bit, but how do you see your work in relation to the past of Black studies or Black study as you were getting at? And how does it open up like new horizons and key elements in the field for you?
Yeah, thank you. So the first book is called Black for a Day: White Fantasies of Race and Empathy.
Mhm.
And it traces this genealogy of mostly white liberals, right, who are, and I'm using air quotes, people can't see this, becoming Black, passing for Black. It's what I call empathetic racial impersonation during the long civil rights movement. And when I mention this, people immediately know the name John Howard Griffin, right? His 1961 text, Black Like Me, where he literally darkened his skin, sun lamps, medication, all of that stuff, and traveled throughout the South to experience racism and then report back about what he had uncovered, discovered. Ugh, I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Okay.
But people did this both before and after Griffin. And I
Wow.
was really thinking about these kind of racial exploits, if you want to call them that, and thinking about them through the lens of a politics around empathy, and
Mhm.
how they were mostly well intentioned, but these good intentions of allegedly good white folks were really trafficking in the most you know terrible stereotypes about both Black people,
Mhm.
Blackness, and the South. I mean, you can't sort of they constantly would say, "Oh, I've got to go to the South to experience these things," as if the South is this bonded repository of where racial terrorism lives and happens, and that's not true.
Mhm.
Um, and that false notion of that exclusively Southern racism I call Dixie terror.
Okay.
And so I think for that book, focusing on empathy as a category that is replete with power dynamics, that's questioning intentions. It motivates a question about how do scholars approach the subject of Black life, and what
Mm.
assumptions do they bring,
Oh.
right, with them when they study these things. Now, these are white folks that I can easily critique. Um, but I think it's also important that we all think about what assumptions we're bringing to the study of Black folk and Black life. Uh, and then this newer project, which I'm tentatively calling Children of the Plantationocene, is bringing lots of different disciplines together. And it's why I needed Black studies to be the home base for this, because my training in literary studies was not fully answering the questions I have, which is what is Black America's relationship to the plantation. I needed literature, archaeology, the interventions of Black geography and Black ecologies, landscape studies, history. I needed all of that to start thinking about answering that question. And so the questions I hope, because I'm writing it now, the things I'm hoping I'm bringing in that project is a really rethinking of the plantation as a different kind of maybe beginning. I'm not going to quite call it an origin story, but one might call it an origin story. But thinking about the legacies that we take from the plantation, thinking about our resistance to some of us even visiting one plantation. And I'm not suggesting we all do this work. It's difficult work. It's really really painful, but I want to begin to think of these spaces as Black craftscapes, as places that show, yes, white supremacy and domination and dispossession and dehumanization, all of that violence, it's all there, but also, right, it's a place of ingenuity and survival and expertise and artisanship and story and memory and folklore. It's all of that. It's all of that for me.
Yes. Oh my gosh, Dr. Gaines. I'm sorry, I'm in awe as you're speaking because you're, even in speaking with you, like, just how you are expanding, opening us up to listeners and to whoever is engaging, but simply in our conversation, just you're calling to focus, I think, this dominant narrative about, like, the plantation in a way that does not offer the fullness or the, like, the capaciousness of what Black life was or could have been outside of, you know, the ongoing, never-ending violences. Like, it opens us up to having to hold simultaneous truths at once, which I feel like is really important, because when I think of, and I'm just thinking in myself, somebody who have, outside of, I think, taking a course with you, I've never sat and had like an intimate engagement with the idea of the plantation, let alone it as an institution. And when you're getting into like the material, the like the social scapes of Black life there, like you're saying, like you're talking about the creativity, the ingenuity, the craftsmanship, like that's an entire dimension of, I feel like, Black life that at times is, especially I'm thinking about throughout primary education, high school, and even into my experience in college, that's never been opened up like that, that possibility of thinking otherwise about how Black people were existing. And I think that's really useful, like almost like a rethinking of the plantation. And it's not to negate our current understandings of it, but it's to build upon and expand and stretch and open us up in these really necessary ways. And I feel like as I'm recalling, you mentioned your first book, and like how in your description of it, it kind of almost seems like it opened up the method that then allows you to do this other work, getting into the plantation, and the real material, like, world of it. And I just thought that was so fascinating. Like, even like asking, like, how are scholars approaching the study of Black life? What assumptions, like, for it to open you up in that way and then to lead you into these projects, this new kind of curiosity and study, I find that to be really, really necessary. But also, I just love that I can witness how those two are interconnected. So thank you again for sharing. And in light, I guess, of your project, and as you mentioned, like, your training in, like, you know, like critical kind of literary analysis, how do you see, because your PhD was in English, and I know that you also did a postdoc fellowship at the Carter G. Woodson Institute. How do you see your disciplinary training from that time, I guess, in relation to the trajectory of your current projects? And I guess something more importantly is, what impact did it have, and does it continue to have on your work? And then, I'm sorry, I have another question. How does being, let me rephrase this, I'm going to restart this. Your PhD was in English, and you were a postdoc fellow at the Carter G. Woodson Institute. How do you see your disciplinary training from this time in relation to the trajectory of your projects? Also, what impact did it have, or does it continue to have, on your work? And lastly, how does being in an African American and African Studies department lend itself to your teaching and your research? And I apologize if this does sound a little bit redundant, because I feel like throughout our conversation, you've been able to touch on so much, but I would like to offer up the space for you to really discuss how that disciplinary training kind of impacted the development of your projects.
Yeah, thanks. So I am still figuring this out, right? Because I literally am new to the Department of African American and African Studies at the University of Virginia after spending 14 years in the English department at Florida State University. So, and my degrees are in English. I have a certificate in African and African American Studies, also with my PhD. And so I was doing that work, but it is very different being in a department of African American and African Studies now, where, first of all, just the not just the intellectual community, but the community itself, right? I walk into a faculty meeting and I'm asked, do I play spades? Right? That's not going to happen. That is not going to happen everywhere, right? But the kinds of critical conversations that are happening in the department were necessary for the kinds of deeply, whatever you want to call it, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary work that I'm doing in this new project. And I needed Black studies to make sure I'm doing this right. I'm not trying to be nostalgic or romantic about the plantation in any way. I need to be in a space where I can be checked in the only way that Black studies scholars can check you, right, about your scholarship and kind of your slip is showing, that kind of thing. I craved that. And it was clear that my work was kind of to doing something that literary studies could not attend to anymore fully. I was becoming illegible as just a literary studies scholar, even though the book is deeply steeped in literature. It's, I'm talking about Toni Morrison's A Mercy. I'm talking about Roots and Kindred, and Jessamine Ward's oeuvre. So literature is there, but the approach is different. The conversations I require are different. The kind of background that I need readers to have is different, because it is not easy to talk with Black folks about the plantation in the ways that I want to talk about it. That is deeply ambivalent. And I want to hold on to that ambivalence, and it's uncomfortable, and I want to hold on to the discomfort. And so I realized that this is Black Studies is the right home for the work, and it's the intellectual communities that I need to push the work further and to make it as nuanced and sophisticated as possible. We have a high bar to clear in Black Studies, and that was necessary for me.
Thank you for sharing. I'm sitting with you mentioning just like, I guess, the legibility across disciplines and how that can impact I don't even want to say the life, but like almost like the life or the aliveness of a project, due to whether it's limitations or its expansiveness and openness, it having those registers where it can make sense of not only the relevance, but like the necessity of the work. And it's great to know that you're able to have those critical conversations in a Black Studies department. But also I love like how you mentioned like being like embracing the fact that within that department, like the critique that comes is one that is embedded with like the knowledge of Black life and Black histories and Black studies, which is so necessary when doing projects that pertain to Black life as it existed, but as it continues to exist and be reproduced in these different ways across different geographies. So thank you so much. It's interesting to know that in kind of like moving across these disciplinary spaces, it has afforded you so much for your project. So I guess my next question, it's a little bit of a big speculative question, and I will reframe it a little bit because I know that you, as you've mentioned earlier, like you think about the origins of Black studies as being, tethered to like the act of Black study beyond like the institution, something really material and grounded in the plantation and its afterlives. I'm curious to know then, what do you think over the decades or the time before, what do you think Black studies has done well? And what do you think that it has not done particularly well?
Okay, here it is. The question. So I have to be honest. The first time I heard y'all ask this question, I gasped. Because I was like, what is this shady ass question? But then I sat with it and I was like, no, because Black studies is about critique, and we need to be able to do that. And so, okay, let me start with what Black studies has done well. And I think what we've done well is write Black folk into the historical record in a real and true way, where we have rejected the pseudoscience, the backwards thinking around that we're not human, that we don't think, that we don't have a history, that we don't have a literature. We have done exceedingly well. We have challenged all of that racist and dehumanizing thinking. Black studies has given us tools for survival. It is life studies. And so in that way, we've done things well. I don't have to go too far back into history to think about what we haven't done well. And I say that as someone who spent 14 years in Florida. And that is important context for what I'm going to say next. I do not think we as a field took the attacks in Florida seriously enough when they started 3 or 4 years ago. And I think that if those attacks on not just the AP African American Studies class, but also attack on Black studies in the university classroom, and really attack on Black life and livability. If that had happened in, let's say, Massachusetts, I think the solidarities would have looked different. If that had happened in California, I think the solidarities would have looked different. I think there was a way in which there was a naive kind of relief that people assumed that shit's going to stay in Florida. That's almost like it was a living Florida meme, right? Florida man meme. Like, oh, Florida's so weird and quirky and, not really part of the U.S. like that. And so what they're doing down there doesn't matter. And not just in Florida, what they're doing down there in the South doesn't matter for the rest of us. And when you turn your back on the South, you do so at your own peril. And I think we are living in a moment where if Florida was the blueprint, this is now the rollout. And so there are people who are expressing shock that, for me, I'm like, shocked how? We've been dealing with this for years. That people who are ignoring what was going on, that felt like this would not happen to our good Ivy League universities, our good northern spaces that are progressive and liberal, and we will never face things like that, like down there. I think that we didn't heed the call quickly enough, and we didn't get our offenses ready quickly enough. And if it hadn't been starting in the South, I think the discourse would have looked very different.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Gaines. In thinking in light of your response of things that weren't done well, I never even thought about the relationship between how folks see Florida as this isolated southern, almost like other space that is detached from like the U.S. and its politics and ideals. But like you mentioned, it felt like what was going on with Florida began to trickle into a more national, like,
very much so.
And they
said that that's what they were going to do. They said it. They're like, they said it. This is the blueprint. And if 2024 goes the way we want, that will be the rollout. They wrote it down. You know what I mean? And so, it was a missed opportunity. Meanwhile, people are being a little bit glib, right? About their own safety, not realizing that we are mutually precarious.
Mm-hmm.
Being like, you got to get out of Florida, as if that solves everything. It does not. We are not. There is no illusion of safety here, right? And we were fighting, fighting for our lives, right, in Florida. I got shingles because I was so stressed out about what was going on in Florida. Florida took my edges, child.
Oh,
Like,
no.
It did. It took my edges. Right. So this literally having like bodily, visceral, physical, right, toll, because of the stress of the thing. It's why I got off social media, because I was saddened by what I saw was, like I said, this kind of naivety around the real threat to all of us,
Yes.
that none of us can pretend is not coming for all of us now. It's very clear. Yeah.
And I feel like even as you were just saying what you just said, it makes me think back to how you were like, in not taking the attacks in Florida serious enough, it wasn't just an issue of like Black studies at like the university level or AP, but like it is an attack on Black life.
Yes.
And that is now we sit in this like, and not we, but I feel like the precariousness is now felt in a way in which it's like you said, it's like a shock, but as you are, like, it was written down, it was spoken about, like it was. So it also makes me think about, how do people relate to the South or situate the South in their understanding of politics in the U.S., but also like just ideologically, like where do you situate the South and its relevance to the world, especially when we think about the history and the development of the United States of America, even in thinking about just culture in general. Like, it's very interesting, the nation's relationship to the South and how we situate it as relevant or irrelevant. Which now makes me, like, I have to know, regardless of the field and its institutional context, what questions do you think are most urgent and that we all should be asking?
Okay. So, okay. I'll answer this question by giving you a little background. So when the Florida attacks started happening, what I did was I started doing something called Black Study Devotions. So, right, I grew up in evangelical spaces and churches, and so as people read the Bible every morning, I was reading text that I felt would literally order my steps before I completed my day. So it was in the morning, every morning. I am sitting with, June Jordan's Civil Wars. I'm sitting with Toni Morrison's nonfiction, which in the United States is published as The Source of Self-Regard. In the UK, it's called Mouthful of Blood, which I think is such a cooler title.
Okay.
Right. I'm sitting with Dispatches from the Ebony Tower. I'm rereading Miseducation of the Negro. And in that way, I am baptizing myself, right, in my sacred critical tradition of Black studies. And the last week or so, I've been working through the Boston Review's 50th anniversary issue every morning, and it's entitled "The Responsibility of Intellectuals in the Age of Fascism and Genocide." And at the opening essay by Robin D.G. Kelley, and you certainly know Freedom Dreams was one of those texts I was working through in my devotional practice in the morning. But he ends his piece with a question that I am going to sit with for a very long time, and I think we all should. And he's talking about a global studies professor named Tiffany Willoughby Herard, who was arrested during a protest. And she says, her question was, when people were when she was asked if she was concerned about jeopardizing her job, Kelly writes, she replied in a single sentence that still brings tears to my eyes, and it brought a tear to my eye as I read it. And that question is, what job do I have if the students don't have a future? What job do I have if the students don't have a future? And I think the questions we need to be thinking about are questions about students, right? In the formal way that this field began, it was student agitation and protest, right? And centering the student again, protecting the future of students is a question that we need to be sitting at the forefront of our work. Who are we responsible to? And for me, that question, will always come back to, Black folk outside of the academy and the students inside of the academy.
Thank you so much for sharing that question. I wrote it down so I can just look at it. Well, first, I want to just say I love your Black Studies devotional practice. Like, even as you were talking and like you mentioned, like how it almost, it doesn't almost mimic. It is a spiritual practice. It's a ritual.
Very much.
Like you said, it is a sacred, critical like practice that you engage in. And I feel like that for me makes like it, I feel like that's inextricable from Black study as like you've discussed it as I understand it. Which also I feel like your commitment to study in that way, I see how that is inherently related to the question that you're having to sit with, which is what job do I have if the student does not have a future? Like, who are you responsible to? So it's also like it's a study with intention. Like it is not just knowledge accumulation for the sake of doing so. Like it is really tethered to our survival in futurity, which I feel like is so important. But what is also something that I really love about Black studies, like there is that pressure. There is the pressure from the world for us to, carve out our existence, to survive, to build with each other, to connect, and that I feel like, as you mentioned, your practices, but also your scholarship in this question, it is all enmeshed and entangled together. Dr. Gaines, thank you so much for sharing your time, your brilliance, and your work and experiences with me and the folks here listening to the Black Studies podcast. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Well, first off, let me say before we jump off here, thank you, Bree. Right? You were in my class how many years ago? I don't know. Yeah. I am so proud of you, to be in conversation with you, to be learning with and from you. And, I like screamed when I heard you come on because the Black Studies podcast is now part of my Black Study devotions. Like I read and then I listen to an episode. That's how I start my mornings. And so when I heard your voice, I was like, I couldn't believe it, but also I could very much believe it because you are right where you're supposed to be and doing what you're supposed to do. And I knew when you were in my class that you had it, and that it was, right, that you had the study of Black life in you and that you took it seriously. And the field is in good hands as you create this archive with your other co-hosts. This is incredible, the gift that you're giving the field, and thank you for stewarding it so well. I'm honored to add my voice to this chorus.
We're honored to have your voice a part of it, and I appreciate your generosity and kindness. I do very deeply. You mean a lot to me. Oh my God.
That's what I'm here for. That's what I'm here for. All right.
Well, like I said, Dr. Gaines, it's been an honor and a pleasure to have you here on the podcast. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. All right. Be well.
I'm going to stop it right now.